Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, loyal listener, to the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is David Noe, and as always, I'm here in the Vomitorium, our studios in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with my co-host, Dr. Jeff Winkle. How are you, Jeff?
Doing great today.
All right. Are we ready to tackle Hesiod a second time?
We are very ready.
Okay, so before we get to it, let's give a shout-out to one of our favorite listeners, Dr. Ed Peters.
Ed. Yeah, I've heard that name before.
Have you?
Yes.
So Ed comes to us from Detroit, Michigan, where he is a professor at Sacred Heart Major Seminary. Ed likes to listen to Ad Nauseam. He especially liked the episode we did on the descent into the Scavi, the tomb of Peter.
So you'd say he's a loyal listener?
I would say he's definitely a loyal
Excellent.
listener.
All right, thanks, Ed.
He's reached the upper echelons of Ad Nauseam.
Fabulous.
Okay, so Jeff, why don't you get our listeners into what we have on tap today?
Well, we're talking about Hesiod's Theogony today,
Okay.
right? So last week we covered his works and days, and this is the other surviving work of Hesiod. The Theogony translates to something like the birth of the gods, the origin of the gods.
The family tree of the whole gang.
The whole gang, exactly.
Okay.
Where Zeus and the whole lot comes from, as we're going to try to tackle that today. Yeah. But before we get into that, I believe you have a quote for us?
Yes, I do. This is from one of my favorite classical scholars, the late Werner Jaeger, from his 1965 work, Paideia, The Ideals of Greek Culture, the first volume. He says, "It was Hesiod, in his other great work, the Theogony or Descent of the Gods, who first ventured to arrange all mythology into a comprehensive philosophical system. Driven by the awakening urge to find a due cause for each event, he constructed an ingenious genealogical tree for all inhabitants of heaven and hell. In his mythical description of chaos, of earth and heaven, and of eros, we cannot fail to see the three essential elements of a rational cosmogony. Earth and heaven are inevitable elements in any such account of the world, and chaos, which also appears in Nordic myths, is clearly an idea native to the Indo-Germanic race."
So in that last part of the quote, he makes reference to other mythological traditions.
Correct.
And I think that's something that we'll explore in this episode a little bit. I see a lot of Near Eastern corollaries in Hesiod's Theogony.
Kind of Gilgamesh-y.
Gilgamesh, Enuma Elishi.
Right.
Something like that.
And we're going to unleash the Kraken later on, if I'm not mistaken.
Something akin to the Kraken.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
exactly. Right. Yeah.
So the big questions or themes that we have in the Theogony, right,
Yes.
the descent of the gods, are things like, is this a canonical creation story?
Right.
Did all the Greeks believe this?
Right. So it's one of those things that Hesiod is in that same camp with Homer from the same time period.
Right.
And he holds a similar kind of place in that he comes as close as we get to a kind of scripture.
Exactly.
Right.
And then we have the notion of order coming out of chaos. We move from nature to things anthropomorphic.
Right.
We're going to define a lot of these terms. Of course, the Ad Nauseam listener is breathing pretty rarefied air for the most part.
That's right. We don't really need to do this.
They know all
of course,
this.
Of course,
I mean,
exactly.
they could, they could record this podcast themselves.
That's right. Exactly right.
But we'll define a few terms. And finally, the question is, why does Zeus ultimately win the war?
Right.
The war, you say? What's going on, Jeff?
We have gods battling.
Okay.
Yeah, a very typical thing in lots of polytheistic creation stories.
Right.
Right.
A theomachy.
A theomachy.
Or a titanomachy.
Yes, to be more specific.
That's right, the
Yep.
Battle of the Titans. Okay, so we're going to take a look at those kinds of things. And as we get started,
Yes.
Here in our first segment, Jeff, you're going to review for us quickly, who is Hesiod?
Hesiod.
In case people were foolish enough not to listen to episode 11.
Exactly right.
We got to catch them up.
That's right. So if that's you, stop right now, go back and listen to that episode immediately.
Yeah, we'll wait.
Right.
Time's up.
All right, yes. So Hesiod, he's an epic poet from the same time period, roughly the same time period as Homer, maybe a little bit later. By tradition, he's a shepherd. He's visited by the Muses. He's from he's from Boeotia, kind of central Greece.
Yeah, Boeotia, place good for cows.
Yes, cowland, cow country.
Not far from Elboya, place good for cows.
Exactly.
There's
right.
a lot of good places for cows. Well, not that many, but the ones that stick out, we have to name them.
Right. That's where the cows went.
Right.
Yeah.
So the town of Askra, the foot of Mount Helicon, somewhere like that.
Right.
So about 700 BC, the Muses touch down there. They make a landing and they say, Hesiod,
Sing
come
this.
on, get to work.
Get to work. Exactly
Okay.
right. Yep. And so he's credited with composing these two poems, the Theogony and the Works and Days.
He's got a couple of other minor works, doesn't he, too?
Lost, right?
Yeah, well, I think they're fragments. We're not
fragmentary
going to
works,
go
right.
into it, really.
But like Homer, probably, if he was a real historical persona, he surely composed other things that just simply aren't available. Right.
Right. So, Jeff, this week you're going to get us started off with a little bit of Greek. A little bit of the poetry from the beginning of the Theogony. So let's hear it.
I should say that I'm a little miffed that you've been kind of hogging all the Greek and
what
Latin
can I say?
Recitation, and maybe after I'm done, the listener will see why that's been.
Okay.
But these are the opening lines to Hesiod's Theogony, again in ancient Greek, and in the dactylic hexameter.
Dactylic, 6 feet per line, right?
Yes.
All right, let's hear it.
So maybe something like this. Museon elekonadion arkomethaeden, aithelekonos ekusenoros megatezatheonte, kaite peri krenen io edia posapaloisen, or juntai kai bomoneristeni oskronionos.
Oh, wow. Mic drop there, Winkle.
That was mellifluous, don't you think?
That was very mellifluous.
I could hear a lyre plucking behind me as I did that.
Yeah, the honey poured out of that, let's say. Very nice. Okay, so now we got the Lombardo translation of those lovely lines. Hackett, 1993.
Yep.
Begin our singing with the Heliconian muses, who possess Mount Helicon high and holy, and near its violet-stained spring on petal-soft feet, dance circling the altar of almighty Kronion.
Right. So we get the muses, I notice, they get a much bigger part in Hesiod than they do in Homer. Homer mentions them in the first line of both the Iliad and the Odyssey for inspiration, but Hesiod goes further. He wants to talk about the muses. He wants to talk about them, where they came from and who they are. Right.
Yeah, I think there is a brief reference also, just to be pedantic, my specialty. Book 2 of the Iliad, before the catalog of ships, he has another reference to the muses. So they crop up.
They do crop up,
But absolutely, Hesiod gives us a full background of who they are, right?
Right.
They're dancing on petal-soft feet near the violet-stained spring. This is beautiful poetry.
It is beautiful poetry. I know you were kind of speaking flippantly when you said, the muses alight and say to Hesiod, get to work.
Right.
But that's kind of what they do.
It is exactly it.
Right. They strong-arm him into doing this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And one of the abiding questions that I have, and my students typically have, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is, did the Greeks really believe this?
Yeah.
Is this merely a literary device, or did Hesiod really believe that this is what happened?
Exactly right. And to go further, as we start getting into the the genealogy of the gods and who they are and what they represent, it also raises these questions of how did the Greeks imagine them? How did they see them?
Right.
Kind of literal, figurative, a mix of both. Right. But yeah, did Hesiod himself believe that he was visited by these distinct feminine divine figures
who had the power to infuse him with poetic skill and inspiration?
Right.
Yeah, we definitely got to talk about that. So the end of the line there, they dance circling the altar of almighty Kronion.
Kronion.
Who or what is a Kronion?
Kronion. Having someone descended from Kronos.
Okay.
Who we'll be talking about.
This is Father Time, right?
Right. Exactly right.
Saturn among the Romans.
Right. So you sometimes see him depicted with the hourglass and the sickle.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
The hourglass is to make sure he's not late for class. Is that what it is?
I think that's right. Exactly.
Okay.
Very punctual.
5 minutes tardy, something
5 minutes
like that.
Exactly right.
And what's the sickle about?
Kronos uses the sickle for a very violent act, and well, let's save that.
But he also uses it to harvest people's souls at the end of their lives.
Right. It's where the Grim Reaper gets the sickle from. Exactly right. Yeah.
So then we have these 9 muses, right? And they have an origin story, don't they?
They do. I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to get into this.
Well, let's just mention a little bit.
Okay.
They're 9 daughters of Zeus, and who's their mother?
I'm blanking on
It's
that.
unpronounceable. Mnemosyne.
Oh, of course, right. So, yeah.
Mnemosyne.
Yes, there you go.
Or in Latin, memoria.
Memoria, memory.
Right.
Yes.
So when memory, this to me is interesting, and I'm tempted toward an allegorical interpretation here, but when memory and the father of gods and men, Zeus, when they join, their offspring is poetry and inspiration, the 9 muses.
Yeah. And that takes me back. I think it's something I think you said last week too, of the primacy of poetry.
Right.
Right. If you wanted to say something serious to the culture, you said it in poetry, not prose.
No, absolutely not.
Right? At least not until you get to Plato and Aristotle.
That's right.
Yep.
And Herodotus. So these 9 muses, who are some of them? Let's just touch on a couple.
We have Clio, who's the muse of history. Euterpe, the muse of song, lyric, poetry.
My favorite one, Thaleia.
Thaleia, comedy.
Yeah, the muse of comedy.
Comedy, yeah.
There is a bust of Thaleia. I think it's a 19th century work. I don't remember who made it. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Captures the playfulness and the beauty of a good joke.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And very important to Greek culture.
Definitely.
We'll have to do an episode on comedy.
It won't be funny, Jeff.
It'll be brutally unfunny.
And we have Melpomene, the muse of tragedy, Terpsichore dance, so on and so forth.
Yep. We should mention Urania, which I think is so interesting. She's a muse of astronomy.
Does astronomy need a muse?
Well, I guess so. I mean, she's one of the big 9.
And she has one.
All right, let's talk about some of these early gods that simply are there at the beginning of things.
Right.
Yeah.
They are not at all anthropomorphic.
No, not at all.
So let's define that term a little bit.
Anthropomorphic, human-shaped.
Okay.
Right. So by the time we get down to Zeus and the Olympian deities, these are gods and goddesses that are sculptable,
right,
paintable. They're distinctly masculine and feminine for the most part.
So Zeus has his ambrosial locks. He's got his beard, his manly beard.
Always beardy.
The heroic torso.
Yes.
All these things. But these early gods, right?
Yes.
Or divinities, perhaps we should say more specifically, because, the gods, the giants, the titans, the nymphs, the dryads, they're all divine.
Yes.
But only the Olympians are typically called the gods.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
I like that too. Right. So these divinities, they're abstract, or they are associated with parts of nature.
Yep. And the first one is chaos. Chaos, as Hesiod tells us. Now, typically when I lecture in classical myth, I try to find something to illustrate this because, the younger kids, they like visuals for everything.
Right.
And it's incredibly difficult. How are you going to illustrate? I try to find like a bowl of spaghetti or something like that.
A bowl of spaghetti? Where's this going?
Well, it's something chaotic, right? There
I
are
see.
a number of different elements, but there's no discernible order.
Gotcha, right.
Maybe a picture of a dorm room or something. Something that's all just kind of discombobulated.
I gotcha. I always use the image of like a lump of clay.
Well, a lump of clay
something
is
that's
good.
awaiting to be ordered.
But there's nothing else in it, though.
Well,
Come on, Winkle.
I mean, the translation that's often given for chaos is a yawning gap, right?
A yawning gap.
A gap.
You got a photo of that?
I don't have a photo of that. It's nothingness. How do you photograph that?
Yeah, but it isn't nothing per se, right? So here's an important distinction. Unlike the Judeo-Christian creation story, right, history, there is nothing at the beginning of that, but there is something here at the beginning of Greco-Roman myth.
That's right.
There's some primordial ooze.
This reminds me of Near Eastern creation myths like the Enuma Elish, where you have kind of land and water are there at the beginning.
Right.
And when they start kind of to mingle together, then you produce more divinities. Mm-hmm.
And so like a good claymation.
Yeah.
So Wallace and Gromit could do this kind of.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it would.
Right. But lots of creation stories will have Gaia, will have Earth, and then things kind of build from there.
So we have chaos.
Yep.
And out of chaos springs out Gaia. No explanation.
Nope.
This is just, it's not procreation. It's asexual generation. Just out pops Gaia.
Right. And that happens later, although I wouldn't say it's the most common feature of these kinds of genealogies. But there's Hera, gives birth spontaneously in one tradition. Right.
As does Zeus in one iteration.
Right.
So out of Gaia then comes Sky, right?
Yes.
Her son. And then after Sky and Earth mate, lots of incest in these stories.
Exactly right. Well, the dating pool is shallow. Right?
I guess so.
Right. I mean, if there's not a lot to swipe on OK Twinder or whatever it is.
Yeah, where are you going with this?
I have no idea.
All right. I think we should just leave it alone, Winkle.
But we need to wind it back a little bit. So, you're already jumping to Sky. We're not there yet.
All right.
So to kind of imagine this, and the way I draw this on the board, where you have chaos kind of above.
Right.
Chaos is where the sky will be.
Right.
And then you have Gaia in the middle.
Yep.
And then you have Tartaros, the underworld below. So I always imagine it.
Is that a kind of fish sauce?
Tartaros?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's tasty. It's a little pungent.
Right.
That in like Near Eastern creation stories, they hear of like the upturned bowl.
Yes.
Of the universe.
I imagine that's convex.
Convex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's the overturned bowl. But chaos and then ultimately Uranos, the sky, kind of taking that place, and then Tartaros is kind of the right side up bowl beneath. Mm-hmm. Right. So you have this typical kind of very basic 3-part universe that's begging to be shaped.
Right.
Yes.
So I have a little quote here.
Yeah.
Were you going to read this one? I think you were going to read this one. This is also from Theogony Lombardo, right?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Okay.
Lombardo translates, "In the beginning, there was only chaos, the abyss. But then Gaia, the earth, came into being, her broad bosom the ever-firm foundation of all, and Tartaros dim in the underground depths, and Eros, loveliest of all the immortals, who makes their bodies and men's bodies go limp, mastering their minds and subduing their wills."
So what really strikes me about that is the prominence of Eros near the end. So this is a god who's, a divinity, who's really important in Greek myth early on, but he fades out significantly and changes in his description by the time we get to the Romans.
Exactly right. He becomes Cupid.
Yes.
Early Greek art, when he is depicted anthropomorphically,
Right.
he's kind of an idealized young man.
14 to 18 years old.
Usually with wings.
Right.
And then over time, he becomes kind of younger and chubbier and more infantile.
Right.
I think when most people think Cupid, they think of the chubby baby on the Valentine's card.
Definitely.
Right. And
So by the time of the Renaissance, he's completely unrecognizable.
Right. And multiplied. You have
Right.
multiple Cupids.
They're all over the landscape.
Right.
Someone must have written a book about this.
I'm sure it's out there.
So if one of our listeners knows of a good treatment, preferably a scholarly treatment, I would say 10 to 15 footnotes per page, they should send us that reference so we can look it up.
Or send us the book.
Send us the book.
Send us the book. Right.
As long as there aren't too many big words.
Exactly right. Yeah. Keep it real.
So with Eros then, originally he's really powerful.
Very powerful. Deadly serious.
Dark,
right?
Mysterious. What are some of the things he does and can do?
He's the catalyst for creation, right? When I see Eros in Hesiod's version, I don't imagine him in my mind's eye as a anthropomorphic deity. He's more kind of a primeval force.
Right.
It's the libido, it's procreation that gets everything moving and multiplying, and that's the force that makes creation go.
Yeah, there's a wonderful reference, you might say, at the beginning of Lucretius, the Roman poet, his De Rerum Natura, the whole enchilada. Right at the beginning of that, he's got this hymn to Venus.
That's right.
Right, the goddess. And as she moves across the landscape, the entire landscape goes a kind of technicolor green as it lights up with procreative activity. Flowers and animals and creatures. Everything is just effusively filling the earth.
Interesting. Have you ever seen the film Pleasantville?
No.
It's a film that starts in black and white.
I think Tobey Maguire's in that, right?
It sounds Maguire-y.
So. It's pre-Spider-Man.
But as people kind of discover their Eros in that film, it changes from black and white to color.
Interesting.
So,
I regret going down this road now.
Should have started with Pleasantville and gone to Lucretius. I apologize for that.
That's all right. So Eros gets everything moving.
Yes. Now, one of the questions that my students in myth class always ask, and I often start with the Theogony, at least very early in the class,
Makes sense.
Is how are we supposed to view these gods?
Right.
And how do the Greeks view these gods? I mean, I find that my students will often come with this assumption that the Greeks saw them very literally and imagine them as when you see a statue of Zeus, they imagine that's how Zeus looks like. And if you were to encounter him, that's how he would look. But it's a really complicated question.
So I have a similar experience when discussing these things with my students. They ascribe to the ancient Greeks a really primitive, almost impossible understanding of their own gods.
Yeah.
And they also think that none of this is real at all.
Right.
And I think that's probably post-Enlightenment.
Yeah.
The world has no supernatural elements in it whatsoever.
Yes, I sometimes see as my students kind of almost like patting the Greeks on the head.
Right.
Like these silly primitive peoples, believing these silly fictions.
Yeah, only really stupid people could believe these things.
Right, exactly. Right. So how should we see them then?
Well, I like the approach that André-Jean Festugière.
Festugière. Is that French?
Yeah, it's a French philosopher, Dominican friar, and so forth. He wrote this work, Personal Religion Among the Greeks, 1954. And I have a little quote to share from that.
Please.
Seen from without, traditional Greek religion has all the marks of a social phenomenon, a thing which concerns the state. So here I'm editorializing, right? Religion is a state activity.
Okay.
And then to continue, temples are dedicated to the civic gods, priests are civic magistrates. On certain days, all the citizens in a body, men, women, and children, gather before the temple for solemn sacrifice. The hymns then sung in honor of the god, the prayers addressed to him, have an official character. It is a matter of obtaining the god's favor for the prosperity and well-being of the entire people. Athena is the goddess of Athens, of the Athenians, considered as a social entity before being the goddess of the Athenian as a private individual. Now here's the money quote, right? Here's the important takeaway. Nevertheless, says Festugier, we should be mistaken if we believed that even the official deity of the city, such as Athena at Athens, received no more than purely civic homage.
Ah, okay. So how would you boil that down? There's a ton of stuff in there.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
So ancient Greek religion has both a very public face and a private face. If you think about the public face, you might think, well, they're all doing this because they're civically obligated to do so, right? Corinth has its god, Athens has its goddess, Sparta, and so on and so forth. But it would be a mistake, says Festugier, and he cites a lot of evidence, private evidence.
Yeah.
It'd be a mistake to think that these people did not believe in their gods and goddesses, that there was no real actual fervency and devotion within their homes and within their hearts, you might say.
Sure. That's very interesting. I think that one of the problems with studying or understanding kind of personal Greek religion is that the example of Athens is so over-evidenced.
Yeah, it's
right?
so prominent.
It's so prominent.
Eclipses everything else.
Exactly right. In my own study, it seems that there's a problem with that in that I don't know if that's typical, right? The way
Right.
that the Athenians saw Athena and how she was, she mourned their soldiers when they died and was so kind of invested in the citizenry of Athens that I'm not sure that's indicative of other places as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So as the creation story moves along in Hesiod, what do we see next?
Well, as we get more generations of deities, we get the earth creation becomes more distinct.
Okay.
Right. So some of the early children are things like the sky, Uranos, who we'll be talking about in a minute, the sea, ocean, mountains.
Both sea and ocean?
Sea and oceans. Well, I guess Oceanos, kind of the river that rings the earth in kind of the Greek conception.
Okay.
And then you have interior seas.
This frustrates students quite a bit.
Right. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, they have I think they tend to have, it's understandable,
Right.
a fairly reductionist approach to these sorts of things.
Sure.
So why is there the sea when we already have the ocean?
Right.
Why are there rivers when there's streams?
Ah, I see. Yeah. I always talk about river ocean.
Do you?
I do. And
Split the difference?
Just split the difference and then move on.
Well, I try to convince them that, look, this is not a scientific account of the sort that you might like. It wasn't written for efficiency. It's meant to be accurate, but it's meant to be beautiful, memorable, and broadly descriptive.
Right. It was sung. There was music behind it.
So the more the merrier.
Exactly.
It's like when you have some chorus in a song, right? It goes on 5-6 times. You don't say the 7th time around, we already had 5 choruses.
No, you love the chorus.
That's right.
What's the phrase is, don't bore us, get to the chorus.
Really?
Yeah. Have you heard that one?
I don't know that one.
Yeah. Well, I have.
Okay. So who are some of these other individuals that come out next?
We get these, for lack of a better term, we get this generation of monsters.
Monsters.
Right. We get the Cyclopes.
Okay.
Yes, the famous one-eyed. I think in Lombardo's translation, he calls them goggle-eyed.
Goggle-eyed.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. Shield eye. One big giant.
One big old eye.
Right in the center of the forehead.
Right. And a number of other kind of semi-human creatures that come along.
And barely pronounceable. Why don't you give it a try, Jeff?
We have Kotos.
Kotos.
Briareos.
All right.
Gyges.
Right.
Yes. Amongst a cast of hundreds.
These are the 100-handers, aren't they?
100-handers. Exactly right.
Yeah, there are 3 of them altogether. Each of them have 100 hands. So
Yes.
if my arithmetic is correct, we got 300 hands altogether.
I think that's right. Do you think they have 100 arms as well, or just hands? Because that's an image that I find really unsettling.
See, this is another one of those kind of biological questions that my students always ask me.
Right.
How did that work? And I just say, hey, I don't teach biology. You're in the wrong building.
Go ask somebody else.
Go ask someone else. I'm
Right.
a philologist, philosopher, theologian. Go ask somebody else.
Yes. However you imagine it, these are creatures with 100 hands each on 100 arms
Right.
each. Right. So they're very good at throwing stuff.
Oh, absolutely. This would be ideal for the Yankee bullpen, wouldn't it?
Throwing multiple baseballs
That's right.
at once, really? I would say more in the outfield.
Okay.
You can catch more balls with 100 hands. I think
I
the pitcher
suppose-
can only throw one at a time.
Oh, fair enough. We're digressing.
Yes,
So Kronos, then,
Yes.
he's about to make a big play, isn't he?
that's right. And I think we see the first appearance of what the Greeks called metis.
Okay.
A craftiness.
Shrewdness. Metis.
A prized characteristic for Greek heroes.
Yes, like Odysseus.
Exactly.
He's the most famous. So Kronos is the arch deceiver.
He is, right. I wouldn't say that he embodies the best qualities, but I think it's one of the reasons that he gets the better of his father in
Okay.
the story. He's clever where Uranos, his father, is not.
Yes, and here is the really graphic portion of this episode.
Yes, so be forewarned.
Be forewarned.
Yes.
Right. We try to keep this highly ecumenical. We want to reach a broad audience, make it PG to PG-13.
Yeah.
but it's going to get a little brutal here.
We got to keep it real at the same time.
All right, so what happens, Jeff?
All right, so Uranos is now in the picture, which
Okay.
is the Greek for heaven or sky.
Yep.
And he too mates with Gaia and has a number of children. But he's bothered by this. He sees the children as a threat. And so when these children are born, he stuffs them back into the earth.
The next generation is always a threat.
Is always the threat.
They're going to supplant Uranos, and he wants to remain the big guy.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So Gaia doesn't like this.
Right.
And she complains, and then so she decides that she's going to recruit one of her children or some of her children to deal with this problem.
So children come out.
Yes.
Children go back in.
They go back in.
Very uncomfortable.
Yep.
And Gaia says, let's solve this problem, so I'm going to tap.
She asks for a volunteer, and it's Kronos who steps up.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Jeff, you're going to read a little bit of that for us from the Theogony itself of what happens.
Yes.
But before that, let's have a word from our sponsors. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Hackett Publishing. Since 1972, Hackett Publishing has been an independent publisher of high-quality translations in the field of classics, as well as many other corners of the humanities. Hackett translations are known for being both faithful to their original languages, as well as accessible to the casual reader. Jeff, are any of our readers casual?
I think they might be, stretched out on the couch.
Yeah, they're all on formal, I thought.
Yeah.
You listen to this podcast with suit and tie. Anyway, these translations earn them high praise from professors and students alike.
Yes, I love Hackett translations. I've used them often in my own class. Favorites being Stanley Lombardo's translation of Homer's Odyssey, Paul Woodruff's translation of Euripides' Bacchae. I love the artwork on these volumes. It's great, clever, witty, thought-provoking. These are books you can judge by their covers.
I have no quarrel with that,
Yes.
Mr. Winkle. But here's the best part. From now until December 31, which I believe is the last day of the year,
Yes.
Ad Nauseam listeners can score 20% on any order.
20%.
20 and receive free shipping from
Oh,
Hackett
man.
Publishing. All you have to do is go to hackettpublishing.com, find the text you want, drop them in your shopping cart, and enter the code AN, Ad Nauseam, AN2020 in the box which asks for the coupon code.
That's all they have to do?
Well, that and a few cartwheels.
A few cartwheels. All right, that's a small price to pay.
Absolutely.
It's a great deal. Listeners, don't hesitate. Check out hackettpublishing.com today.
hackettpublishing.com. Coupon code AN2020. You won't regret it.
Now, we have a second sponsor, too. Isn't that right?
Indeed, we do.
Who is it?
Well, it's one I'm quite familiar with. It's the Moss Method.
The Moss Method. Tell us about that.
Well, the Moss Method, some of our listeners might be familiar, is a program I've developed to master ancient Greek.
This can be done
Absolutely. As I like to say, it takes you from neophyte to erudite
in a short amount
in a
of time.
short amount of time.
That sounds great.
And guess what, Jeff?
What?
We are running a special Blafry Monsai.
What are you saying there?
A Blafry Monsai.
Black Friday Month, so what does that mean?
It's a Black Friday, Cyber Monday special.
Oh, man, what do they get?
Well, listeners, if they go to the website, mossmethod.com, anytime on Friday, November 27 through Monday, November 30, that's about a 4-day period,
Okay.
they can get Module 1 at $50 off.
That's huge.
It is huge. Or they can get Modules 1 and 2 together at a $75 discount.
That's huger.
It's hugest, perhaps.
That sounds great. So mossmethod.com.
Yes, mossmethod.com
Okay.
to score the Blafry Monsai.
Check it out.
All right, Jeff, so as we get back into it,
Yes.
a little bit of listener discretion, a very little bit, is advised here.
Yeah.
What happens next? Enter the sickle.
Enter the sickle, right.
Okay.
So as we said, Gaia's trying to recruit one of her children to take care of Dad, and it's Kronos who steps up. So let me read a little bit from Lombardo's translation here.
What lines are these? I mean, where are we in the
This
Theogony?
lines 165 to 173.
Okay.
And this is Gaia speaking at the beginning. She says, "Listen to me, children, and we might yet get even with your criminal father for what he has done to us," from these stuffing children back into her. "After all, he started this whole ugly business." They were tongue-tied with fear when they heard this. But Kronos, whose mind worked in strange ways, got his pluck up and found the words to answer her. "I think I might be able to bring it off, Mother. I can't stand Father. He doesn't even deserve the name. After all, he started this whole ugly business." So it's after that Gaia produces a sickle
Right.
from herself.
Yes, she generates it. It's adamantine.
Adamantine,
This
right.
really hard metal.
Exactly. And Kronos takes it up,
Scoops it off.
and what does he do?
Yeah, he severs his father's genitals.
Yes.
Right,
And-
so there's going to be no more children of Sky.
right. I think this takes us back to Eros. And as the central element is that to try to control or to use the power of Eros is inherent in your identity as a divinity. And so the castration, again, I think that, how are we supposed to imagine this? Is literal? Is it
I
figurative?
try not to imagine it at all, frankly.
Exactly right. But I think that the point is, by castrating his father, Uranos is no longer a functioning deity.
That's right.
Yeah.
So then, strange to say,
Yes.
and you can't make this stuff up, right? The things that have been severed, right?
Yes,
Speaking delicately, are tossed into the ocean.
that's right.
And from them comes
Aphrodite.
Aphrodite.
Right. So foam gathers around the severed parts.
Right.
And out of this is born Aphrodite.
A goddess terrible and beautiful.
Exactly right. And note, this is before Aphrodite, who's she's an Olympian goddess, right? She's in that camp with Zeus. She comes about and is mentioned long before Zeus comes around.
Right.
So she has a very strange backstory.
Yeah. She predates Zeus,
She predates Zeus.
whose daughter she is in another version.
Right.
Strange to say.
If you apply kind of this literalist lens, that kind of stuff's going to bug you.
Right.
But I think there's in the Greek tradition, if one story is good, hey,
Two's better.
Two's better.
No problem with two competing stories.
Right.
Now, neither of us are historians of religion or specialists in this particular area of the
That's
classical
right.
world.
That's true.
But one of the theories that I've heard is that this is the combining of an Eastern myth with a later, specifically Greek myth.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the two are just adopted in, and they survive
Oh,
without any apparent contradiction.
right.
So we have this etymology. What does Aphrodite mean?
The two parts of her name combined would have sounded like to an ancient Greek as the one born from the foam,
Yeah.
foam born.
Yes.
Right. So there's questions over kind of where does this come from. One of the theories that this is what we might call a false etymology.
A just so story?
A just so story, right?
Right.
So that Aphrodite had long been part of the tradition, and by the time she gets to Hesiod's era, the Greeks didn't really know what her name meant, but it kind of sounded like in their language the foam-born one.
Yeah,
so maybe
given
the
from
story
the foam.
was created to kind of explain the name.
And what did Botticelli, Little Barrels, what did he do with this?
Little Barrels, yes, Botticelli, the great Renaissance painter.
Yes.
He painted arguably his most famous painting after this scene.
One might say the most beautiful painting of all time.
Oh, would you go that far?
I'm really partial to it.
It's a phenomenal painting.
It is, and I have been privileged to see it in person several
Yes,
times.
as we both have in the Uffizi Gallery in the Botticelli room.
That's right.
And right on the next wall is his Primavera,
Yes.
which is actually a painting I prefer to this one.
Oh.
But we can talk about
Winkle,
that.
you're taking us in an unexpected direction.
But yes,
So Aphrodite, Venus, she floats to shore on a half shell.
that's right. Blown by the winds and where
The wind god Zephyr off to her right,
Exactly.
clutching a nymph.
Yes, that's right.
Her red hair, covering at least in part her body.
That's right. And she's blown to the shore of an island, and where she is clothed or waiting to be clothed by one of her first attendants there. Yeah.
Now, to which island was she blown?
Cytherea, I believe, in Hesiod's version. Aphrodite is often associated with islands, probably from this tradition, but Cytherea,
Right.
this island just kind of south of the Peloponnesus.
She's called Cytherean or Cytherean.
Cyprus is another island that she's
Yep.
often associated with.
Now, there are two Aphrodites, right? Let's pause a moment on that.
Sure. I think to some degree we were talking about, the Greeks were comfortable with these multiple stories, but even at some point, even the Greeks themselves had to say, we should try to explain this. And so later on in the tradition, we have an Aphrodite who's born from Zeus and a minor goddess, Dione, which is just
Whose name means
Zeus.
Zeus,
Right. it's
female
kind of-
Zeus.
But Zeus found the woman he was always wanted. It was just a feminine version of himself, right?
Zeusa.
And Aphrodite, probably the Aphrodite that most kind of casual students of mythology are familiar with, is the product of that union.
Right.
So we have these two Aphrodites. So the Aphrodite that's born from the castration is Aphrodite Urania.
Yep.
And Aphrodite, the daughter of Zeus, is sometimes called Aphrodite Pandemos, the common.
Yeah, the one
Aphrodite.
for all the people.
The one for all the people.
Now, Plato makes a lot of hay out of this.
Yeah.
In the Symposium, and if I'm not mistaken, elsewhere as well.
That's right.
The kind of procreative love,
Yes.
which all things share, and then the intellectual love.
Right.
Which is the other Aphrodite, Urania.
Right.
The
So
one that leads us eventually to contemplation of the divine.
there you go. Right. So but a topic I think for another episode.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Right.
So, Jeff, we're on the downslope now to the grand finale, aren't we?
That's right. The action movie part of,
Okay.
the story is about to come up here.
So
Yep.
we're going to see the birth of Zeus,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
We're going to get Prometheus and Pandora again.
Again?
Not only in Works and Days, but here in the Theogony.
That's right.
And we're going to get the big battle scene.
Yes, the Theomachy. The
That's right.
Titanomachy. Yes.
What was that?
The battle between the Titans and the
It's okay.
Olympians.
And that wonderful Cornelis van Haarlem painting of the Titans falling from heaven
Oh, yes, exactly.
with all those artfully placed butterflies.
That's right. We'll put it in the show notes. All right, so Kronos, at this part of the story, starts to make the same mistakes as his father makes, and he starts to have children that he sees as a threat.
He's a chip off the old sickle, you might say.
He is, exactly right. But it's more complicated. Kronos receives an oracle of sorts that tells him that one of his children will overthrow him.
As a text message? How does this arrive?
I'm not exactly sure how it arrives.
I'm going all literal on you now, aren't I?
Exactly right. Yeah,
Sorry.
Stop asking these questions.
Sorry.
Oh my gosh. It's an example of what I like to call in my myth classes the rule of oracles.
The rule of oracles.
An oracle pronounces something, it has to come true.
Okay.
And you might bend over backwards to stop the dark fate from happening, but it's gonna happen.
It's going to snow in Michigan in the winter.
Exactly right.
You can't stop it.
Can't stop it.
Okay.
So Kronos decides to, as his father stuffed them back into Earth, he starts to swallow them. And I believe you're going to take care of the next quote.
Yes, I am. A little different method Kronos adopts. So here we have, this is not the Lombardo translation, but we're going with Nelson and Caldwell here. Stephanie Nelson. Great Kronos would swallow these, as each would come from the holy womb to his mother's knees, intending this, that none of sky's proud line but himself would hold the honor of king over the immortals. For he learned from earth and starry sky that it was fate that his own son would master him, although he was powerful, by the counseling of great Zeus. Jeff, this riveting, disgusting scene where Kronos is eating his children, this is wonderfully displayed, if I'm not mistaken, by Goya.
Goya, a painting from around 1819.
Okay.
Yes, well, again, we'll put this in the show notes for listeners to look at. It's a horrifying painting. Right? You have Kronos here as wild-haired, bearded creature that's chomping off bits and pieces of this body that he has in his arms. It's terrible. But I think it gets at the horror of this scene, right?
Absolutely.
And treating it in a very literal fashion.
Right. So what does Zeus do to avoid this fate?
It's the old stone trick.
Really?
That everybody knows about the old stone trick, right?
You take a stone that looks like Zeus, tastes like Zeus, smells like Zeus.
Tastes like Zeus?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And Rhea, which is his mother, we haven't mentioned her, but this is Kronos' sister. She's a Titan.
Yes.
And again, back to the incest. Kronos takes her as wife.
Yep.
All these children are born. Rhea wants to save Zeus.
Right.
She doesn't want the fate that befell the other children to befall Zeus.
Exactly right.
So she gets some advice from their joint parents, Earth and Sky.
Right.
Grandpa and Grandma come back into the picture, and they say, Rhea, take this stone and give it to Kronos. He'll think it's Zeus, and we'll take Zeus and spirit him away and save him.
Right, off to Crete, I believe, is where Zeus was hidden away. Right?
That's right.
So Kronos swallows the stone and is none the wiser.
Right.
Which, again, doesn't speak well to his cleverness. We were just talking about that. He outwits his father. His mind works in strange ways. But again, we see that there's a limit to his metis.
Well, there's a lot of speculation here about this being a kind of political allegory. Once someone gets in power, he loses his grip, and so on and so forth. And that's how these stories are often read, which is plausible but completely discounts the fact, as we said before, that the Greeks believed this was true and sincerely believed in it.
Exactly right. But so kind of an absolute power corrupts absolutely kind of element to it. Yeah.
Right. So what happens after he swallows the stone? Zeus eventually returns from Crete.
He returns from Crete, and the children that Kronos has swallowed, he vomits up.
Yeah, but Zeus makes him do this, right?
He does. How does he do that?
A large bottle of Pepto-Bismol.
Pepto-Bismol. Ipecac.
Which one? Is it Ipecac?
Ipecac, right.
That's the one that induces vomiting.
Vomiting, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could get him as a guest host, maybe.
Although I think he'd be a very unpleasant guest host.
Yeah, no doubt. If he behaves the way he does in the Goya painting, we want nothing to do with him.
Exactly. This is the vomitorium, but we don't want people actually vomiting.
It's not the dismembratorium.
No, exactly right. We have some standards. Right. All right, let's move on. So this is in some ways, this is my favorite part of the story. This is the action movie part.
Okay.
This is where thunderbolts start flying.
This is where we spend all the budget.
Exactly. So we have these generations of deities warring with each other. We have Titans and Olympians clashing. We have thunderbolts being thrown. It's the big action climax.
And this is fought from opposite mountains, if I'm not mistaken, for a period of 10 years.
10-year war, which is the length of any good epic war.
Definitely.
Right? So it's Mount Olympus and Mount
Othrys. So on the mountain of Olympus is Zeus. He brings in the 100-handers.
Yes.
They throw missiles for him. He has the Cyclopes making thunderbolts, working overtime.
Right.
But on the other mountain, whom do we have?
We have an array of Titans.
Right.
Right. So
Kronos and all his buddies.
And his buddies, right.
Now, what happened to Prometheus and Atlas? Weren't they involved in this conflagration also?
They were. Now, Prometheus is a special case. As we noted in last week's episode, his name means forethought. He knows the future. So who is he allied with here?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, he takes the side of Zeus.
Yes, exactly. But ultimately, the relationship doesn't turn out well.
He gets nailed to the Mount Caucasus.
Exactly right. But
later on,
Prometheus, being Prometheus, he can see the writing on the wall.
That's right.
Atlas is on the other side and ends up getting his famous punishment of holding up the world on his shoulders for eternity.
Right.
Right.
So I got a little bit of Lombardo here.
Yeah.
That from line 690 through 695, nearing the end.
Yes.
Nearing the end of this 1,000-line poem. So Jeff, you're going to read that for us.
Yeah, I will read this. Yes, this is some of my favorite part of the poem. And now Zeus no longer held back his strength. His lungs seethed with anger, and he revealed all his power. He charged from the sky, hurtling down from Olympus in a flurry of lightning, hurling thunderbolts one after another right on target. From his massive hand, a whirlwind of holy flame.
That's a really brilliant poetry.
It is. You can just see him just chucking thunderbolts, probably faster than even the 100-handers.
That's right. Bringing devastation, and they overwhelm the Titans. But Gaia here, she has a last gasp.
That's right. She got one more ace up her sleeve. If Gaia has sleeves, I'm not sure.
But she says, "Release the Typhon."
Release the Typhon.
Release the Typhon.
So kind of one last big monster to see if she can take down Zeus.
Okay.
But Zeus,
Zeus is her grandson, right?
He is, yeah.
Yeah, grandson.
Grandson, yeah. Yep. This always reminds me of it's like a dragon slaying motif.
Okay.
This is really kind of at the one time in all of Greek myth that you see Zeus really acting like this. He's almost like he's a hero battling. He's like Theseus battling the Minotaur.
Yeah, or Perseus and Andromache and the sea monster. And
exactly
so forth.
right. So it's of a type, but it's a rare role for Zeus. But he overwhelms the Typhon and chains it up and puts it far beneath the earth.
But what happens next, after the Titanomachy is all over?
After the dust settles?
The Titans have been vanquished.
Right.
Zeus and his buddies now rule on Olympus. Zeus shows some of the same error-prone tendencies as both his father and his grandfather.
Exactly right. He does some more god-swallowing. Talk about that famous episode?
Yeah, so he has a tryst with Metis.
Shrewdness. Cunning.
Cunning, craftiness, all of these personifications, you might say. But he remembers then that there is a prophecy.
Right.
The prophecy, the rule of oracles, is that the child of Metis will be greater than its father.
That's right.
So what does he do?
He swallows her.
What did Dad do? You have an opponent? Swallow them.
Swallow them, right. So again, another lesson not learned.
Right.
But again, backed into a corner by the oracle, by the prophecy. Right.
And which is really mysterious and interesting because these oracles, called Tuche sometimes, or the Parkai, whether it's Greek or Latin, they have authority and influence that supersedes all of these other divinities the story.
Exactly
Where do they come from?
Yeah, right.
The deep magic built into the bones of the world,
that's
right.
That. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, Moira, destiny, right. But I want to back up a little bit because it seems like Zeus, he kind of finds a way around the oracle.
Okay.
Right? So he swallows Metis, and then famously their child, Athena, springs right from his head.
So after swallowing Metis being pregnant, the baby moves to his head, Zeus now begins to have a splitting headache.
He does, literally splitting headache.
Right, so he summons Hephaestus.
Who chops his head open.
Right, splits it open.
As you do.
Of course.
Right, and out jumps Athena.
Athena in full panoply.
Exactly, full armor.
Full grown and fully armed.
Yes.
And this is where my students say, where did that armor come from in her brain? And I say, once again, I'm not a biology professor. Exactly. You're in the wrong class.
Yes, and you're ready to walk out of the room at that point.
I am,
yeah,
right. Fully armed and in full war cry.
Yes.
She's ready for action.
Exactly right. And so Zeus has found a way to kind of obviate the mother in this case. And so he becomes both kind of father and mother in this story, and then kind of he weasels his way out of the oracle. Although in some sense you could also argue that Athena is much more wise and cunning than Zeus is.
Yes, well, because the story is told by Athenians for the most part.
Well, of course, right, exactly.
And she's their patron deity.
Right.
They love her. So much, in fact, did they love her that this story is told on the east side of the Parthenon.
That's right.
In the pediment, the birth of Athena from the brain of Zeus.
Right. The front door of the temple.
Right.
Which is when you visit the place, you approach the back. It's the part that faces
when you
the rising
come up
sun.
through the dromos and so forth.
Exactly right. Yeah.
When you move to the back on the east side, you can see Athena being born from Zeus's skull, Hephaestus jumping back in surprise
Yes,
as
exactly.
he holds his axe. No one expected this.
Yes, it's huge. Right. So one of the questions we started off with was, why does Zeus, or how does Zeus succeed where his father and grandfather did not? And I think one of the answers to that is Zeus, despite seeming to start to make these same mistakes, swallowing deities, is that he does order his eros in a way that his father and grandfather did not.
Now, wait a minute, Jeff. Yes. Zeus orders his eros?
It's temporary.
If we know anything about Zeus, is that he is a constant philanderer.
Exactly right.
He sleeps with everything.
Yes, exactly right. So I would say it's very, very temporary.
Okay.
So the child that is greater than him is Athena. This is not a deity that, she might be greater than him in terms of wisdom, but she's not a threat to his rule.
Fair.
And if you look at some of these early marriages and children, we have abstractions such as themis, order, law.
Yeah, what's appropriate?
Appropriate, kind of divine law. Eunomia, good civil law. We have dike, justice.
Right.
Irene, that we have peace.
Mm-hmm.
So these children are things that are going to kind of order his rule rather than immediately threaten it.
Yeah, this is an interesting interpretation, something I haven't thought a lot about.
Yeah. I think that's one of the questions that Hesiod is trying to answer. How is it that Zeus came into power, but also what does he do differently? Why is he more successful than Kronos and Uranos and Chaos?
So as we wrap up the Theogony,
yes.
What do the last lines of the poem talk about?
There's lots of genealogy. It's a lot of the Theogony is not very action plot driven.
It's cataloging.
It's very cataloging, right?
Didactic poetry meant to teach something,
yes.
Help people remember the contours of their religion.
Exactly right.
The closest the Greeks get to a canon.
Yes, exactly right. So we get lots more genealogy. We give some digressions on some of the famous heroes, such as Jason and Heracles show up, and he's explaining of how they're related to the gods he's just mentioned.
All right, Jeff, so as we wrap up, what kinds of things have we seen this week?
I think we've seen kind of the distinct Greekness of Hesiod's poetry, right? I think it's easy to compare his creation story to Near Eastern creation stories and see kind of a broad corollary there. But this, I was really struck by kind of the emphasis on metis and cunning and how that develops. Uranos has none. Kronos has a little. Zeus is starting to get it. Mm-hmm. And that really kind of explains the success or lack of success.
Yeah, that's really well put.
Yeah. What else? What did you take away from kind of your reading of this and reviewing?
Well, it helped me get away a little bit from the biological focus that, even though I have mocked my students a little bit, I'm often distracted by those details too.
Yeah.
How is all this possible?
Right.
Does this really make sense?
Exactly.
And at some level, I'm not sure that Hesiod intends it to receive that level of scrutiny.
No, I don't think so either. My sense is that in terms of how an average ancient Greek saw and believed in the gods, it was a much more kind of metaphorical kind of thing than a kind of a literal kind of one-to-one anthropomorphism.
They believed it, but he's painting in broad strokes.
Broad strokes, exactly right.
So I have a closing quote, again from my buddy Werner Jaeger.
Read it.
His philosophy, meaning Hesiod, his philosophy is still a system of myths and actively living divinities, as we read it in the strikingly original poetic form which Hesiod invented for it. But his mythical system is formed and governed by reason.
Thank you, Werner.
Yeah. Can't go wrong.
Yeah, love it. All right, we got to get out of here, right? And so to our listeners, if you like what you hear, it would really help us out if you subscribe to our podcast, if you leave a review on whatever platform you're using, if you got comments or questions or ideas. Criticisms, yes. If you have those.
Convulsive reactions.
Yeah, send those to Dave. At dave@adnauseam.com. If you just praise and nothing but good things.
That goes to
Jeff at adnauseam.com. Again, the V in there.
They can't forget that.
Nope.
The V for victory.
So check out the website, check us out on Instagram, and thank you for continuing to support us.
That's right. And what are we going to cover next week?
The Heluari.
What's that?
That is gorging.
Okay.
So more gorging. It was just perfect for this podcast.
Yeah,
right?
so Heluari, Cicero and Cato, and gorging on books.
Yes.
In Finibus, Book 3.
Right. A good Thanksgiving episode.
Yeah, you're going to load up on turkey and other kinds of delights. You're going to load up on books.
You're going to load up on books.
Yeah,
right.
Tune in next week for that.
Exactly.
So we want to thank our sound engineer.
Yes, Mishka.
Mishka Fernando. She does brilliant work for us. Thank you, Mishka.
Thank you, Mishka. And I believe you have our gustatory parting shot this week.
I do. I have our gustatory gastroclassical Fare thee well.
Drop it.
This is from Oscar Wilde.
Ah, yes.
After a good dinner, one can forgive anybody, even one's own relations.
Perfect for Thanksgiving.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.